In the heart of Pine Ridge, a small town tucked between rolling hills and frost-covered woods, mornings began in silence. The air always carried a stillness that seemed to pause life before the world woke up. On one such winter morning, Griffin Wade, a man whose hands bore the marks of years spent shaping wood into beauty, sat quietly at the edge of his bed listening to the faint hum of the heater. His son, Max, slept soundly in the next room, his small breaths soft and even. For Griffin, this was the calm before another long day, a day of sawdust, cold wind, and quiet work that paid just enough to keep the lights on and the pantry half full. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. He took pride in that. By 7 a.m., the old pickup coughed to life, its engine protesting the chill. Griffin adjusted the mirror, glancing at the small photo taped beside it, Max with a missing front tooth and a grin big enough to warm even the coldest morning. "Let's get through today, kiddo," he muttered under his breath, as if the boy could hear him from home. The road stretched ahead, empty and gray, leading him toward Langston Motors, the local dealership where he had been hired to repair wooden framing for their new showroom. It was a job he didn't particularly like. The people there treated him as invisible, but the pay would help him buy Max a proper winter jacket before the next storm. As he pulled into the parking lot, the world around him still half asleep, something caught his eye. Near the main entrance, a woman stood clutching a torn canvas bag to her chest. Her hair was tangled, her coat frayed at the edges, and the look on her face spoke of exhaustion that went deeper than the cold. She spoke to a salesman in a pressed suit who kept glancing over his shoulder, as if afraid someone might see him speaking with her. Then, with a forced smile, he stepped back and gestured toward the sidewalk. Whatever she had come for, she wasn't welcome. Griffin could read it in the way she lowered her head, in the way her shoulders tightened against words she'd probably heard before, words that sting because they remind you of your place in a world that values wealth over worth. He should have walked inside and started his work. He wasn't a man who interfered in other people's problems. Life had already taught him that good intentions didn't always end well. But when he noticed the woman's trembling hands and the faint shiver that escaped her body as the wind whipped past, something in him shifted. Before he could think too much about it, he reached for his thermos, poured a cup of coffee, and walked toward her. The salesman glanced his way, then turned back toward the building, unwilling to involve himself further. "Excuse me," Griffin said softly, offering the steaming cup. "You look like you could use something warm." For a moment, she hesitated, eyes darting between his face and the cup as though unsure if she could trust kindness when it came without a price. But the need for warmth won. She accepted it with both hands, her fingers brushing his briefly. "Thank you," she murmured. Her voice was delicate, almost too quiet for the cold air. "Rough morning?" he asked. She nodded but didn't answer. The wind carried her silence like a confession. Griffin wanted to ask more but saw the weariness in her eyes, a kind of fatigue that came from being unseen too long. He knew that feeling all too well. So instead, he simply said, "I'm heading into town. Can I give you a ride somewhere?" Again, she hesitated, studying him, measuring his words. But after a moment, she whispered, "Just to the motel near Willow Creek." Her name, when she finally offered it, was Mira, the drive was quiet, broken only by the hum of the old truck's heater and the sound of tires crunching over thin ice. Griffin didn't push for conversation. He had learned long ago that sometimes silence was the kindest language there was. When they reached the small roadside motel, she turned to him with a faint, grateful smile. "You didn't have to stop," she said. "Sometimes you just do," he replied simply. She nodded, as if she understood exactly what he meant, then stepped out into the cold. The door closed softly, and she was gone. Griffin drove away thinking little of it, just another moment in a life full of fleeting human encounters. But that night, as he tucked Max into bed and listened to the boy's small voice mumbling his bedtime prayers, he thought about the woman again. About her eyes, haunted yet gentle, and the quiet way she had thanked him. He didn't know why, but she lingered in his mind long after the day ended. The next morning, when he opened his front door to fetch the newspaper, something unusual waited on his porch. A brown paper bag, slightly damp from frost, sat neatly by the mat. Inside were 2 blueberry muffins, still warm, a thermos filled with coffee, and a folded note written in careful handwriting, "For someone who stops for strangers. Mira." He stood there for a long time, the cold forgotten. The note was small, simple, yet it carried a weight that pressed against his chest. No one had left him a gift in years. Not since his wife's passing, not since kindness had felt like a thing that belonged to other people. For a man who spent his days building and fixing what others broke, the realization that someone had thought of him, even briefly, was more powerful than he could explain. That he sat on the porch step, the sun barely rising above the rooftops, and took a bite of one muffin. It was sweet, homemade, imperfect. He smiled without meaning to. Inside, Max's sleepy voice called out, "Dad, who brought breakfast?" Griffin looked at the note again, folded it gently, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "Just a friend," he said quietly. He didn't know it then, but that small act of kindness, the decision to stop for a stranger, had set something in motion. Something larger than either of them could see. In a town that rarely made headlines, where lives blended quietly into the rhythm of the seasons, an unexpected connection had been made, and though he didn't understand why fate had chosen that cold winter morning, Griffin Wade, the carpenter who believed his life had already settled into its quiet pattern, would soon learn that some of the most life-altering moments begin not with grand gestures, but with something as small as a paper bag left on a doorstep, and the courage to stop for someone. No one else would. The following day dawned quietly over Pine Ridge, the kind of morning that carried both peace and melancholy in equal measure. The frost on the windows glimmered faintly in the pale sunlight, and the small house smelled faintly of coffee and pine wood. Griffin Wade sat at the kitchen table, staring at the folded note from Mira that he had placed neatly beside his cup. He didn't know why he kept reading it. The words were simple, just a few lines, but they had a strange warmth that he hadn't felt in years. Maybe it was the way she had written, "For someone who stops for strangers." It reminded him that despite the loneliness he had accepted as part of life, there were still people who saw goodness, even in the smallest actions. Max ran into the kitchen, his hair sticking up like he had wrestled with his pillow all night. "Dad, are you thinking again?" he asked with a sleepy grin, climbing onto the chair across from him. Griffin smiled faintly, ruffling the boy's hair. "Always, buddy." The child began eating cereal, humming softly to himself, and Griffin watched him with quiet gratitude. For all the struggle and exhaustion that came with raising a son alone, moments like these grounded him. But somewhere beneath that peace, Mira's face still lingered in his thoughts, not because of attraction or curiosity, but because she had looked like someone who had once carried a full life and lost it piece by piece. He knew that look too well. Later that morning, Griffin arrived at the dealership again. The cold bit through his gloves as he unloaded the last of the lumber from his truck. The manager, a man named Ellis, was pacing across the showroom floor with his usual impatience, barking orders into his phone. Griffin had never liked the man. He treated people like tools, useful until worn, then easily replaced. As Griffin moved toward the workshop, he overheard Ellis talking. "She came back again, that woman from yesterday, said she left something behind. I told her to leave before I called security. You'd think people would know their place." Griffin froze. "Mira." He turned slowly, pretending to check his tools, listening as Ellis continued. "I swear, these people think kindness means they can hang around. She said she was just returning a note. Pathetic." Griffin said nothing, but his chest tightened. He finished his workday without another word, though the weight of Ellis's cruelty clung to him. When he left that evening, he drove toward Willow Creek, half telling himself it was to clear his head. But he knew the truth. He wanted to see if she was okay. The motel looked even lonelier at night, its flickering neon sign casting a tired glow over the cracked parking lot. He parked near the office and sat for a moment, unsure of what he was doing. Just as he was about to turn back, a faint sound of coughing came from the far corner. Mira was sitting on a bench near her room door, wrapped in a faded blanket, staring out into the empty road. She noticed him after a moment, her expression softening in surprise rather than fear. "You again," she said quietly, a small, almost disbelieving smile touching her lips. "You found the muffins?" "I did," he replied, stepping closer. "Best breakfast I've had in months." That earned a soft laugh from her, the kind of laugh that carried both warmth and sadness. "I'm glad. I didn't know if you'd even remember me." Griffin sat on the edge of the bench, careful not to crowd her. Hard to forget someone who shows up with coffee and muffins before sunrise. There was a long pause. The wind stirred the trees, and somewhere in the distance a train's horn echoed faintly. "You didn't have to come back," she said after a while. "I didn't," he admitted. "But I wanted to." Her gaze dropped to the ground. "People don't usually want to. Not after they see all this." She gestured vaguely toward the rundown building, her worn clothes, the shadowed circles under her eyes. "It makes people uncomfortable to see how far someone can fall." Griffin leaned forward slightly. "Maybe they just forget it can happen to anyone." That made her look up, really look at him, and for the first time, the guardedness in her eyes softened. She exhaled slowly, like someone who'd been holding their breath for years. "I used to have a home," she said after a long silence. "A real one. I worked as a nurse. Then my husband, he got sick. Cancer. The bills took everything, and when he died, there wasn't much left of me either." Her voice cracked, and she looked away quickly. "I came here for a job that never materialized. The motel manager lets me clean rooms for rent money, but," she trailed off, shrugging. Griffin didn't know what to say. Words felt small against the enormity of her story. But he knew the ache of loss, the kind that changes the rhythm of your days, the way you look at the world. His wife's death in a car accident had done that to him. Two people who had never met, both carrying grief shaped differently but weighing the same. "Do you have anyone here?" he asked finally. She shook her head. "No. Just me." He nodded slowly, thinking. "Then maybe it's time you had someone again," he said gently. "Not someone to save you, just someone to remember you're still here." Mira blinked at him, uncertain how to respond. It wasn't pity in his tone, it was something else. Something steady. She didn't realize how much she had missed hearing that kind of sincerity, not from Charity, but from shared humanity. they sat in silence for a long while, the kind of silence that feels safe rather than heavy. Eventually, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small wooden pendant, the shape of a bird, smooth and worn. "I made this," she said, placing it in his palm, "when I was trying to stay busy in the hospital after he passed. It reminded me that even broken wings can still feel the wind." Griffin turned it over in his hand, feeling the rough edges. "It's beautiful," he murmured. "Maybe you can fix it," she said with a small, wistful smile. "You seem like someone who fixes things." That night, as he drove home, the pendant sat on the passenger seat beside him, catching bits of light from passing street lamps. It was strange how something so small could carry so much meaning. He didn't know what would come of all this, if he'd see her again, if their paths would cross in any meaningful way. But what he did know was that something had shifted inside him. For the first time in years, the quiet of his house didn't feel empty when he walked in. Max was asleep, the television humming faintly in the background, and Griffin stood in the doorway watching him. Life had worn him down in ways he rarely admitted, the long workdays, the silent dinners, the lingering grief. But now, something faint and fragile had re-entered his life. It wasn't love, not yet. It was the first spark of connection, of shared survival. That he placed the small bird pendant on the shelf beside Max's photo and whispered almost to himself, "Maybe we're all just trying to fly again." And though the night outside was cold and endless, something within him had quietly begun to thaw, a warmth born not of romance or rescue, but of recognition. Two people broken differently, teaching each other that even in the quiet corners of life, kindness could still find a way back. They spent the afternoon like nothing had broken. Because maybe in the quiet hours of drawing and walking and missing, something hadn't broken at all. Something had just taken longer to arrive. Griffin made iced tea. Max dragged Mira into a game of backyard catch. And the porch swing held all three of them by sunset. As light faded, Mira pulled a small envelope from her tote bag and handed it to Griffin. He opened it carefully. Inside was a folded deed, a transfer of ownership. One line written in ink. "The Harper house is now in your name." Griffin looked up, startled. "Mira." She shook her head gently. "It's not a gift. It's a home for you, for Max, for the people you'll teach. The lives you'll rebuild. I have others. But this one belongs to the hands that brought it back to life." Griffin was speechless, not because of the gesture, but because she'd understood. She wasn't trying to repay him. She was joining him. "I want to start over," she said, "but not from scratch. From here, from us." He looked at her, then at Max, who had fallen asleep in her lap, his hand still wrapped around the sea glass. Griffin leaned forward, touched her hand. "You're already here," he said. "And we've been waiting." That night, Mira stood on the porch alone, looking out over the quiet street. Griffin came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You sure?" he asked, voice low. "About what?" "About staying?" Mira turned to him. Her eyes were calm, anchored. "I've been admired, protected, expected, managed," she said. "But with you, I've only ever been seen." He rested his forehead against hers. "And what do you see when you look at me?" he whispered. She smiled. "A man who didn't try to save me. Just sat beside me until I saved myself." They didn't say anything after that. There was no need. The porch swing creaked once, then settled. The stars blinked, and in that silence, without spectacle or song, love arrived fully. Not as something discovered, but as something remembered. It wasn't a wedding. There were no tuxedos, no rented chairs, no floral arches or diamond centerpieces, no orchestra waiting to play, no photographers darting around with lenses the size of dinner plates. But there was sunlight. There was laughter. There was lemon bread cooling on the windowsill. Max's crayon banner fluttering over the porch that read, "Welcome home, Miss Mira." And there was love. Quiet, steady, bone deep. That morning, Griffin stood barefoot in the yard, his hands dusty with sawdust and rosemary. He'd built a long cedar table beneath the oak tree, and Max had helped to tie mason jars filled with wild flowers along its edge. The porch swing had been polished. The wind chimes Mira brought back from the coast whispered in the breeze. And Mira, she was in the kitchen barefoot, too, twirling to old Ella Fitzgerald on the radio, her laugh rising like a skylark. Her hair was pinned up with a pencil. She smelled like honey and sun. Griffin watched her through the window. He didn't need a ring. Didn't need a vow. Whispered before a crowd. This was the vow. The life, the morning, the fact that she had stayed. By early afternoon, a few neighbors trickled in, those who had known Griffin and Max since Emma passed, and had silently hoped that one day their house would hold more than memory. There was Mrs. Callahan with her famous peach cobbler, Doy from the library, who brought a book wrapped in twine, the Thompsons from down the road with a jug of sweet tea and a fold-up bench. No one asked questions. No one needed to. They saw the way Griffin looked at Mira, the way she looked back, and that was answer enough. Max stood on the porch holding a clipboard, reading from a piece of paper with more scribbles than legible words. Ahem, he said, squinting in the sun. We are gathered here today to make things official and to eat cake. Laughter rippled through the yard. Griffin stood beside Mira, his hand wrapped around hers. Max continued, his voice steadier. My dad is really good at fixing stuff. But Miss Mira, she fixed him, sort of. And he helped her fix her, too. That's called teamwork. Griffin felt Mira's fingers tighten gently around his. Max looked up. So now we all agree that she lives here forever and helps with homework and makes grilled cheese the way I like it. More laughter. Mira wiped a tear from her cheek, nodded solemnly. I accept these terms. Max grinned. Then I now pronounce you a team. He threw both arms up as neighbors clapped and cheered, and Griffin lifted him into the air for a spin before setting him down between them. It wasn't traditional, but it was theirs. Later that night, after the guests had gone, the candles burned low, and the sky turned violet with dusk. Mira sat on the porch swing wrapped in an old quilt. Griffin brought her tea and sat beside her. Max, already asleep inside with his arms around the sea glass she'd once given him. She looked at Griffin. You ever think about how many tiny things had to go right for us to meet? He smiled. Or how many things had to fall apart first? She nodded. Sometimes the breaking is what makes room. He leaned his head against hers. They rocked in silence. The stars blinked on above them. 2 months later, the Harper House officially reopened, not as a private home, but as the Wade Lane Community Workshop, a place for anyone who needed to build something new. Griffin taught his first woodworking class to a group of recently released veterans. Mira coordinated scholarships for single mothers. Max hosted an art wall called Draw Your Second Chance, where anyone could tape up a picture of the life they dreamed of having. One morning, a woman walked in wearing worn shoes, no purse, and eyes full of apology. Mira stood to greet her. I'm not here to ask for anything, the woman said. I know, Mira replied, smiling gently. But maybe it's time someone gave you something anyway. She led her to a stool, offered her tea, and placed a pencil in her hand. The Rolls-Royce had long since been returned. Mira had written to her father finally, and told him, the life you wanted for me was never wrong, but it was never mine. He didn't reply, but Harper Lane did. Every week, she sent fresh lavender to Pine Ridge, tucked in brown envelopes with handwritten notes. One simply read, you didn't just find your way back. You lit the path for others, too. One evening, as summer softened into fall, Max asked a question at dinner. Do you believe in miracles? Griffin looked at Mira. Mira looked at Griffin, and in that shared glance, filled with everything they'd fought for, fled from, healed through, there was only one answer. We live in one. Before we go, we'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Are you tuning in from a quiet town like Pine Ridge? Or perhaps from a big city where kindness sometimes feels like a rare treasure? Take a moment to say hello in the comments. We read every word and your stories mean the world to us. And if this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe to the channel. Not for the numbers, but so you never miss a moment of warmth, hope, and the gentle reminders that love and second chances can show up when we least expect them. Thank you for spending your time with us. Until next time, stay kind, stay open, and never stop believing in quiet miracles.